Peru's Congress voted against a motion to start an impeachment process against President Pedro Castillo this Tuesday. Chile's Congress approved a long-awaited bill to legalize same-sex marriage on Tuesday, joining just a handful of countries in Latin America. South African lawmakers rejected a bill to change the constitution on Tuesday, which would have allowed for land expropriations to redress past injustices. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the Telesur studios in Havana. We begin with the news. We begin in Peru, where Congress voted against a motion to start an impeachment process against President Pedro Castillo this Tuesday. The unicameral legislature vote saw 46 lawmakers in favor and 76 against the motion, with 4 abstentions. The motion needed 52 votes to pass, which would have forced an impeachment trial with a higher threshold to remove Castillo from office. This was the second attempt by right-wing sectors to oust Castillo, who has faced fierce opposition and media campaigns against his government ever since taking office. On Monday, the president met with leaders of several political parties to attempt to install dialogue and ensure political stability in a nation that suffered a long political crisis prior to Castillo's election, with 3 different presidents in the space of a week in 2020. The Comptroller General of Ecuador decided to archive the investigation against President Guillermo Lasso in the Pandora Papers case. The measure is taken by failing to find elements that demonstrate that President Guillermo Lasso, at the date of the registration of his presidential candidature, was the owner of assets or capital in tax havens. The Pandora Papers point out that Lasso was direct or indirect owner of assets or capital in jurisdictions or regimes considered as tax havens. President-elect of Honduras, Xiomara Castro, secured the most votes in the country's electoral history in the November 28th general elections. According to the latest update from the National Electoral Council, the leader of the Liberty and Refoundation parties secured 1.4 million votes, which represented 50.63% compared to the 35.89% of the vote for Nasri Asfura from the ruling National Party. No other Honduran president elected since 1981 has surpassed 1.2 million ballots. Meanwhile, it was reported that the Public Prosecution Office is guarding the facilities of the National Electoral Council, where all electoral materials are processed in case of any violent incidents that may arise, as some sectors seek to ignore the results. The electoral body also reiterated that the elections went smoothly and in accordance with the law.
Xiomara is the person with the most votes that Honduras had ever had, and I'm really pleased, and the fact that she is the first woman says a lot about that.
We'll be right back after this very short break. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back to From the South. Chile's Congress approved a long-awaited bill to legalize same-sex marriage on Tuesday, joining just a handful of countries in Latin America. The law will also enable married same-sex couples to adopt children. The bill received the green light from the upper house on Tuesday and was immediately given the final stamp of approval by the lower chamber of deputies with 82 votes to 20 against. Same-sex couples could only get married in Costa Rica, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina, and in 14 of Mexico's 32 states up until now. Chile has been eagerly awaiting the legalization of same-sex marriage since former President Michelle Bachelet sent a bill to Congress in 2017.
Tremendous example for those countries that still do not approve equal marriage. I think Chile took an important step in a very transversal way, but we still have to keep moving forward, because as the same organizations have told us, this does not end violence against the LGBTQI+ community. This is only a step towards recognizing rights, but there is still a long way to go in this regard.
It is hard to believe that today we are taking this step, but this step could be taken thanks to the fact that we have been working for years on a profound cultural change, on the common sense of the majority, which today does not express itself discriminatorily in its great majority. Today, the common sense of the majority speaks of acceptance of diversity, and in this institutions are in debt. Therefore, together with celebrating same-sex marriage as a fundamental milestone in our history,
In Cuba, the Center for State Control of Medicines, Equipment, and Medical Devices on Tuesday approved the emergency use of Soberana Plus vaccine candidate for COVID-19 convalescent children aged over 2. The objective is to apply the new vaccine candidate produced by the Finlay Vaccine Institute for children with 2 months or more of hospital or home medical discharge. Thus, the Center for State Control of Medicines, Equipment, and Medical Devices argued Soberana Plus candidate may be administered to all COVID-19 convalescent children aged 2 or up, in accordance with Cuba's present health regulations and provisions. Cuba has applied a dose of Soberana Plus since the end of past September for COVID-19 convalescent people aged older than 19 with 2 months or more of their hospital or home medical discharge. Mexico has begun offering booster shots of COVID vaccines to people aged over 60, with President Andrés Manuel López Obrador receiving his jab at his morning press conference in a bid to encourage others to do so. The booster doses began to be applied in 6 of the country's 32 states, including Mexico City, 4 days after the country's first case of the Omicron variant was confirmed. Priority will be given to those over 60 who have not completed their first vaccination schedule and those with immunodeficiency disorders, as explained by the Undersecretary of Health in charge of the pandemic strategy. The official also noted that Mexico is registering a fall in its COVID infection curve.
we are going to start the booster vaccination plan for the older adults throughout the country. There is no conclusive evidence to recommend boosters in a generalized way. We begin this week with a decrease once again, which is encouraging because we had 2 consecutive weeks of an increase in infections, but we see that this did not set into a general trend towards a possible 4th wave.
And the World Health Organization announced that there is no indication Omicron causes more severe disease than the Delta variant of COVID-19, according to preliminary data. The organization also said that existing vaccines should protect people who contract the Omicron COVID variant against the worst outcomes of the disease. WHO Emergencies Director Michael Ryan noted that the highly effective vaccines that have proved effective against all the variants of the virus to emerge so far in terms of severe disease and hospitalization should do the same in this case. The identification of the new variant has sparked several nations to ban travel from the southern African region, a move denounced by several African leaders as excessive and discriminatory. While the variant was first identified by South African scientists, evidence has since shown that it was present in European countries before its identification.
At the moment, at least the preliminary data doesn't indicate that this is more severe. In fact, if anything, the direction is towards less severity. But again, that's early days, and we have to be very careful in interpreting the data.
In an exclusive interview with Telesur English, lawyers for Venezuelan diplomat Alex Saab, detained and charged in the United States, explained the details of the case. David Rifkin, a partner of Baker Hostel law firm and lawyer for Saab, explained the unlawful nature of the case given Alex Saab's status as a special envoy.
In the United States, in Alex Saab's case is as follows. We are in the Court of Appeals, specifically in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, that presides over district courts in Florida and several other states. And we are arguing in favor of Alex Saab's status as a special envoy from Venezuela to Iran. Under both international law and U.S. domestic law, special envoys are entitled to full diplomatic inviolability, which means that he cannot be subjected to any form of civil or criminal process. He cannot be punished. He cannot be subjected to trial. He cannot be molested in any way. And given the state of the law in this area, we're optimistic that we will carry the day.
And the lawyer for Alex Saab stressed that his defense is arguing that the United States cannot proceed against him on any charge given his diplomatic status.
I'd be glad to confirm that by virtue of his full diplomatic inviolability, the United States cannot proceed against him on any charge, including the one charge that remains from his indictment. Full diplomatic inviolability, I think it's important for your listeners to appreciate that, means precisely that. Inviolability from any form of coercive measures of whatever nature, no matter what the charge may be.
David Rifkin, lawyer to Alex Saab, noted the unlawful actions by the authorities of Cape Verde on detaining and extraditing the Venezuelan diplomat to the United States.
They were violating both their obligations. Cabo Verde as a country that has ratified the relevant international treaties. They're violating international law. They're also violating Cabo Verde law. They had absolutely no right to detain him. They had no right to extradite him. And the United States had no right to seek his extradition. So there have been a lot of unlawful actions that have taken place so far. And what we're working on now is to finally get to the point where those wrongs, those unlawful actions would be remedied, and Alex Saab would be set free to continue his diplomatic mission.
And Nancy Hollander, a partner at Friedman Boyd Hollander law firm and serving as an expert for Alex Saab, underlined the political nature of the case and the difficulties in securing a fair trial.
It's very hard to ensure to the extent we can that he will receive a fair trial, but it will be very difficult. This is a political case. There is no doubt about it. Alex Saab was taken off an airplane that dragged off an airplane essentially in Cape Verde. He was on his way to Iran as a special envoy because he needed medicines for Venezuela that it could not get because of the sanctions imposed upon it by President Trump. The United States is or was the largest importer of Venezuelan oil. And when the United States stopped importing Venezuelan oil, everything else fell apart. Venezuela could not provide for its people. And this is why Alex had to go to Iran to get medicines for the country. Now, whether he can get a fair trial in the United States, it is problematic because he's in Miami. Miami jurors are known to be hostile to Cubans and Venezuelans, and it will be very difficult, but we will do everything we can for him if the case gets back to the district court. At this point, the district court is not allowed to proceed, as David explained, because the case is in the 11th Circuit.
We have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. South African lawmakers rejected a bill to change the constitution on Tuesday, which would have allowed for land expropriations to redress past injustices. The proposed law failed to garner the required two-thirds majority in the 400-seat parliament, with 204 lawmakers voting in favor and 145 against. Black South Africans were dispossessed of their land during 3 centuries of colonialism and apartheid, which officially ended in 1994. According to data provided by President Cyril Ramaphosa, whites who make up 8% of the population possess 72% of farmland in the country. Less than 10% is in the hands of black people who make up 4/5 of the population. For the past 4 years, a multi-party committee has been working on the proposed changes which would have allowed the state to take farmland from private owners and redistribute it to landless blacks.
Abstentions, 145 members voted against and 204 members voted in support of the bill. As the required majority has not been obtained in terms of Section 74, subsection 2 of the Constitution, the bill will not be read a second time.
Following his victory in the presidential election on Sunday, re-elected Gambian President Adama Barrow outlined his government priorities, including plans for a new constitution. According to official results, Barrow secured 53% of the ballot, while turnout in Saturday's polls was high at 87%. The president faces a challenge of improving economic growth in one of the world's poorest countries, while his main opponent in the presidential race is challenging the results. International partners are pressuring the tiny West African state to push ahead with reforms to strengthen its democracy, including constitutional changes that would limit presidential terms.
And the whole world, and all Gambians, that we will have a new constitution, and we will have term limit and absolute majority will be the constitution. If you are a Gambian, it is everybody's responsibility to contribute to national development. You are not working for Adama Barrow. Nobody is working for me. We are working for this country. That's why even in these elections, I don't think there is a loser. We are all winners because it's the Gambia that is important. So we'll do everything possible to bring the people together to make sure we develop this country.
On the sidelines of the 7th edition of the Dakar International Forum on Peace and Security in Africa, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Senegalese host President Macky Sall denounced the unfair representation of Africa at the United Nations Security Council, where no African country has a permanent seat.
Reform. God only knows when it will be done because many interests are at stake. But what is certain is that it's unfair that the African continent, with 54 countries, is not represented as a permanent member of the Security Council. With South Africa, with all the other countries, we will continue to fight to stop this injustice to Africa.
We want fairness, we want Africa to be well represented and to be heard, because it cannot be fair that 1.3 billion people's views and thoughts cannot be heard at that high level. In the same way that the views of the countries which have a veto right are heard.
At least 38 people died and 69 were injured in a huge fire on Tuesday that tore through an overcrowded prison in Burundi. Many prisoners were still asleep when the blaze took hold in a penitentiary in Burundi's political capital, Gitega. Much of the facility was destroyed. The Interior Ministry informed that the disaster was caused by an electrical short circuit at the nearly century-old prison. Victims with the most serious burns were taken to hospitals. Some carried in police pickup trucks, while others with milder cases were treated at the scene. The facility housed more than 1,500 inmates at the end of November, according to prison authority figures, far higher than its capacity of 400. The Iranian government has reiterated that the lifting of United States sanctions is a must-do in order to continue the talks taking place in Vienna to revive the nuclear deal. Meanwhile, Tehran and its allies announced that the negotiations are being undermined by Washington and the Israeli regime. We have more in the following report by our correspondent Hisham Wanous.
Syrian Foreign Minister Faisal al-Mekdad, speaking in Tehran, reiterated Syria's support for Iran's positions with respect to the Vienna nuclear negotiations. Damascus agrees with Tehran that a good agreement is feasible as long as Europe has the political will to sign the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and the United States abandons its policy of maximum pressure against country. The position announced by the Syrian Foreign Minister reflects the position of the Syrian leadership and people, which is a position of principles that advocates the rights of all nations, including the Islamic Republic of Iran, in developing and obtaining nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, and therefore they agree with the Persian country that negotiations should lead to the lifting of sanctions and stop the policy of extortion and maximum pressure applied by the United States against the Islamic Republic of Iran. In the same context, the two allies denounced that the occupying Israeli regime is putting pressure on the West and is carrying out a campaign of lies and accusations against Iran in order to derail the Vienna negotiations. This is part of an Israeli plot to destabilize the West Asian region, as Damascus and Tehran denounced. The world community must stop this aggressive policy of the Zionist regime aimed at undermining negotiations that could lead to an international agreement with Iran that does not benefit the interests of the Zionist entity. And that is why they conduct this campaign of lies every time a new round of negotiations begins, even though it harms the interests of Israel's Western partners. Meanwhile, Tehran maintains it will not withdraw its demands. These demands are contained in the draft proposals Iran presented during the recently concluded 7th round of nuclear talks, and with hopes they will be met in the upcoming negotiations.
Hisham News, Telesur, Oriente Medio.
We've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website, Telesur English. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gio Martin. Thanks for watching.